our speaker. Okay, so thank you for joining us today for our webinar hosted by the Vernon Area Public Library. Our program today is called The Cultural Dilemma of America's Foundational Freedoms. We are so pleased to have with us a special guest, Professor Najjar Abdul-Musawwir, who is with us this afternoon. He is an internationally acknowledged artist who has exhibited throughout the United States, Africa, Asia, and Europe. He currently works as a professor of studio arts and art history in the School of Art and Design and Africana Studies at the Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. So he's joining us from Carbondale this afternoon. He's also the president of the African American Museum in Southern Illinois. So good afternoon, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we can get that going. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to turn off my microphone and my camera, but if someone needs to reach me, you can reach me by the chat. I'll be happy to monitor that. And now I'm going to turn things over to our speaker.
Okay. My emphasis is in painting, but I have, as being an African American, even when I was a student, as an undergraduate and graduate student, I always found myself having to go out and look for resources and knowledge about African American art history. And over the years, it kind of gave me the possibilities of looking not only at the art itself, but the history associated with it. And today I want to share, about the Declaration of Independence and the Emancipation. And what I'm doing is looking at three artists who was working during we call the Cultural Dilemma period. And those artists is, as noted here, Patrick Reason, Edmonia Lewis, and Frédéric Bartholdi. And the first two are African Americans, and the second is a French artist. And so let me, Cultural Dilemma, this cultural period that I'm going to be discussing, the Cultural Dilemma period is from 1865 to 1920, during that particular period. This particular period was a period of double consciousness, where African Americans, not only in general, but even the artists, the printmakers, the wood carvers, the sculptors and so forth who were involved in making art, they was asking themselves, who am I? And where do I belong? Because once the emancipation came about, they were free. So how do they determine, am I an American or am I an African? You know, I was considered a slave. I was considered not property, not human. And this whole idea of where I find my placement at. And what's interesting, W.E.B. Du Bois, a great scholar in terms of sociology and Black history, wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folks, published in 1903, which addressed the issue of this idea of double consciousness. This idea of being, it is like a term that's describing the internal conflict experienced by groups in a very oppressive society. And because of this idea of because of this whole idea of double consciousness, there was two ways in African Americans approach making their work. And the two major artistic expressions were demonstrated amongst African Americans during this post-Civil War period. One of these accepted the artist's environment and experiences as a major factor in the creation of the works of art, while the other favored the abandonment of African values and the substitution of European tastes and aesthetics. Was simply being said that these particular artists either had to look at the ways of incorporating European aesthetics or try to deal with whatever is in front of them now. How do I have a conversation about what I'm working with in front of me, in the environment that I'm in, the experiences that I'm having? One of those artists was Patrick Reason. Patrick Reason, born 1816, died 1898. He was a Philadelphia engraver. He spent 4 years studying printmaking, and who is best known for his work with the statement, "Am I not a man and a brother?" Now, Patrick Reason was a Black abolitionist. He worked with other abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass. He worked with white abolitionists, particularly the leading abolitionist, white abolitionist of that time was Williamson Garrett. And so it was interesting in terms of how they interrelated with each other. But Patrick Reason not only was connected with those artists, abolitionists in America, but he also was connected with abolitionists related in terms of France and as well as over in Britain. And so he was more than just an American abolitionist, but he took on the role of an international abolitionist because of the relationships he was able to develop. And what's interesting also about Patrick, he created a piece. He created a piece titled "A Colored Young Man of the City of New York" in 1855. And above his head it has, am I not a man and a brother? Now this particular symbol or this image was not only used by Reason, but it was also used by many of the abolitionists of that time, this particular image and this particular statement. Even they created a medallion with this figure on his knees in chains and appealing to the moral consciousness of our society of America at that time to treat me like a human being. Mind you that once you was a slave in early America, you was considered property. It was no different than being a cow or a hog or a horse. You were property. Whoever you were owned by, you were not considered a thinking being. It was until many years later that eventually, because of the Civil War, they wanted to allow the African Americans at that time called the Negro to vote. And as a result of voting, they declared that Black people or African Americans or the Negro was considered 3/5 of a human being. Mind you, not even a whole human being, but 3/5 of a human being. So this statement made by the abolitionists, "Am I not a man and a brother?" was an appeal to say that I am human and that I should not be treated as property. I should not be discriminated against in this fashion. And this particular image became very popular amongst the movement. It was also, I like to make note that Frederick Douglass had met with some white abolitionists and some Black abolitionists had met. And when they met, it was funny because the white abolitionists said that they wanted to collect money and send Blacks or Africans back to Africa from America. Frederick Douglass asked the question, "Where are you from?" And they mentioned cities. He said, no, where are your foreparents from? What country? And they mentioned several countries, England, France, Ireland. And Frederick Douglass said, "Why don't we just take that money and give y'all some money and give y'all more money, and then we send all white people back to their countries?" And he said they was appalled by such a gesture. And Frederick Douglass said, "Well, how should we feel when you tell my sending us somewhere we don't even know where we're going to, or don't understand how we can be develop any type of future based on the fact that we've been removed from that country, removed from that society. Where in Africa are you going to take us?" He said, "Shouldn't we be just as appalled?" And so these were the type of conversations that were going on. This idea of freedom and the idea of being shackled and treated as property and even talked to as property. Another artist from the same period, around this, a little later, but she was born in 1844, and they say she died in 1911, but her death is questionable. We're not sure exactly when Mary Edmonia Lewis actually died, but scholars have come to believe that 1911 is the date, the year in which she had passed away. She was a sculptor who studied at Oberlin College, which was considered an abolitionist a college, a school they was allowing blacks to attend, and traveled to Rome, Italy, to continue her studies, where she continued to study the carving of marble, where she was best known for her neoclassical style. It is said that Edmonia Lewis' work was more idealistic than realistic because it had a neoclassical style, that it had this Eurocentric type of appeal to it. And she was part Chippewa as well as part African. Her mother was Chippewa Indian, her father was African. And for years, she always wanted to venture off to get educated, but her mother didn't want her to leave the reservation because she was afraid that something bad would happen to her. When her mother passed away, she eventually went on to attend school, and she was able to get in school and was able to travel. And during this particular period of her life, she loved creating sculpture pieces, and she identified not only with her African culture, but she also identified with her Indian culture. So a lot of her work reflect her ethnicity as a Native American as well as an African. One of the pieces that she's well known for, amongst many that she have done, is Forever Free. This is a marble piece. It's now housed in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Created in 1867, which is interesting because it was, we note that the emancipation date is 1865, so we're looking at 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was made. In this piece, just like we see in, we just saw in Patrick Reason's piece, we see the shackles, the chain, where the figure is holding the chain in one hand, and you see a chain at the bottom and on their ankle and near their foot. The young females in the crouch praying position, much like we saw in Patrick Reason's print, this type of appealing and praying for freedom. And so here we find two particular artists who actually embrace the idea of this movement. I embrace this idea of the chain as a symbol, dealing with this idea of being oppressed, but at the same time, in this particular, what Edmonia Lewis does, she's saying, not only am I appealing to you, but we want to break these chains, in which we find these particular chains broken. It was interesting also that Edmonia Lewis studied, when she studied in America, she studied marble, carving marble, stone. And women carving marble or carving stone or doing sculpture work was not, it was frowned upon, if I may. They felt that it was something that was a labor that men should be doing. But when she was at Oberlin College, she studied with Edward Brackett, and she actually respected Edward Brackett because Edward Brackett made she said that any man who would do a bust of John Brown must be a friend of my people. So, if we don't know, for those who don't know who John Brown was, he was a white abolitionist, a white revolutionary who went on a rage to free slaves from the slave plantation through armed struggle. That he used, that he said that they were not going to free the slaves just by accident; they would have to be forced. And John Brown, a white abolitionist, led a movement to free Africans. And her teacher did a bust of John Brown, and she felt that anyone who do a bust of John Brown must be a friend of her people, meaning African Americans, Black, or the Negro. Now, she studied marble carving with him, but then she went on to Rome, Italy, to continue to carve marble, where she was known also by her Indian name, Wildfire. And so while she was there, she continued to develop her technique in carving, and became very known for the Roman neoclassical style of carving, as we notice in this particular piece, where it looks more idealistic than realistic, that you can still feel the sense of Eurocentricism in the figure, in the faces, in the characters. They don't have what you call an Afrocentric aestheticism in terms of the figure, where the figures are rendered. And so we find that Edmonia Lewis had mastered the craft of the Roman art form, or this Italian art form. Now, it's interesting because when I teach my class at Southern University, I always talk about Statue of Liberty when I talk about Edmonia Lewis, or talk about Patrick Reason. And the students always say, what does the Statue of Liberty has to do anything with Black African American art history? And I say, well, it depends on your position. Now, I must note something, that there has been a lot of conversation in the past about the Statue of Liberty actually being the Black Statue of Liberty, and meaning that they felt that Frédéric Bartholdi had used a Black woman as a model, which is not true. He actually used his mother and his wife as models for the Statue of Liberty. Not only that, they felt that there was a connection because of this Black soldiers during the Civil War. And because it was during that same period when Lincoln was in office, Abraham Lincoln was in office, during that period, he was pushing, the Civil War was going on, they was pushing for this idea of freedom for slaves, and 3/5 of a slave, they can vote and so forth. All these things, these positive things that appeared to be happening. Over in France, the French abolitionists was reading and hearing about what was going on, felt that Frederick was influenced, which he was, influenced by, what's the, they're trying to remember the poet, the abolitionist and the poet, Najjar. Najjar wrote a poem and this engraving on the Statue of the Liberty, which I will reference in a few. But this idea of the Statue of Liberty being made, one of the things that was being pushed for is that the Statue of Liberty would be completed and sent over to America for the next Independence Day, which I think this was for, they wanted it by 1876, because the 4th of July, Independence Day was started in 1776. And so the Statue of Liberty has this connection where Frederick created this commemorative model as a celebration or acknowledgement of the independence of the United States, or independence of America. Now, if I may, when Frederick finished the first model of the Statue of Liberty, and there was, a matter of fact, me and my wife actually went to Chicago, not Chicago, excuse me, went to New York and got an opportunity to see a replica of it in New York. And it stood, it must have been about 16 inches, 18 inches high. And it was the first, again, I repeat, it was the first model. And the first model of the Statue of Liberty was called Enlightening the World. Enlightening the World was the original name when it was sent over. If I may, understanding that this Statue of Liberty was a commemorative a gift to the United States from the French government, and that for the friendship that was forged between the United States and France during the Revolutionary War. By 1903, the Statue of Liberty was inscribed with Alma Latteris, Poetic Words. In fact, I quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." I can't help to think of that word, to breathe, yearning to breathe free. Considering what's happening now in social justice, what's going on in America today, and the chokehold and those things going on. And now I'm sitting here reading about the very words engraved into the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And the statue symbolized America as a safe haven for refugees and immigrants from every corner of the world. Now, the reason I'm reading this and the reason I'm talking about this at this point is because Edmonia Lewis, Forever Free, and Patrick Reason's Am I Not a Man and a Brother, both dealing with both are appealing to the idea of being free, of finding a safe place. And as a result, this Statue of Liberty that was created, if we look at the history of Frederick's research, we saw that he looked at all the monuments throughout the world. He looked at the Sphinx in Egypt. He looked at the monuments in South America, the Mayans. He looked throughout the world to look at as many monuments as he could find to come up with what we know as the Statue of Liberty. Here we see the model of forgive me forgive me for my typing error at the top, but nevertheless, let me continue. Here in these images, we see the first model of the Statue of Liberty, and then we see the second model of the Statue of Liberty, or what eventually became the Statue of Liberty. In the hand is a broken chain in the first model, and she's holding up a torch. At the bottom on her ankle, there's a chain, a shackle, and a broken chain on the first model. When it was received over here in the United States, they said, no way, we're not accepting. This is not about the Negroes. This is not about freeing Black people. We accept the gift, but we don't want that to be part of the conversation. So they redid it, took the chain out the hand, broken chain out the hand, and placed it with the book, the tablet. But what's interesting, is that when the chain on the Statue of Liberty, where the foot is at, it was still there. If we look here, we'll see the chain at the bottom of the foot, and over here we see the chain that came off the other ankle. Now, though they made the changes, they did not change the shackles on the bottom of the sculpture piece of his model. And when they were sent back to the United States, and my memory serves me right, that by this time Lincoln had passed away, or was not well. He had got assassinated before it was completed and sent back to America. And most people are not aware of that. Most people are not aware that this shackle that was attached to the ankle, and that the broken chain that was in the hand was directly related to the Emancipation Proclamation in America. But now we also see that, but we understand that it was for the independence of white America or Europeans coming to this country, or anyone coming from European country. And it's a totally different experience. So when the Statue of Liberty was set up, when it was celebrated and so forth, the question is, how does that relate to Black America or African Americans? And that's really, it's really moving and really disturbing when you find such a icon of a world symbol as a contradiction, it appears. As a contradiction, it appears to be not about the people, but about a group of people. And so we look here and we see get a closer look at this, the shackle and the foot. I took the opportunity to go to New York to also see the Statue of Liberty and to experience this. And so the question of Independence Day, or 4th of July, appears to be something that was for white people or the Europeans who came to America. In that, the Emancipation Proclamation that was happening was the liberation of the Black people or the people of color in America. So in 1776, which this sculpture piece supposed to be help commemorate the freedoms of Europeans coming into this country, also was looked upon as something to celebrate or to embrace the Emancipation Proclamation of the freeing of Africans who were forced into slavery. Frederick Douglass, I mentioned him earlier in the talk. Frederick Douglass was a slave, born a slave. He didn't know what, and he actually didn't know what day he was born, when he was born. It wasn't until he became an adult that he took February as the month in which he was born in, which actually became the month that was selected for Black History Month in America, and which is celebrated around the world in different countries. Frederick Douglass, as a slave, as a child, eventually grew up and learned how to read and write. Mind you, you could not read or write, you were not allowed to read or write during that particular period in American history. That any Blacks, Negroes, or African Americans who were caught reading or writing could be executed, could be murdered. But nevertheless, Frederick Douglass was able to learn how to read and write. Not only did he learn how to read and write, he became a spokesman. He became a spokesman, had opportunity to meet with the different presidents of this country. He eventually traveled around with other abolitionists, Black and white, speaking out against this idea of oppression. Frederick Douglass was considered a fugitive because he was on the run. He refused to be a slave. He was on the run. They called him a fugitive. Now, I found this idea of being a fugitive somewhat contradictory. What makes it contradictory is simply that he committed no wrong. He committed no crime. All he wanted was his freedom. And so it's interesting, even today, when young Blacks or adults as well talk about freedom, suddenly it's almost like, oh, you want to be a fugitive, or you want to run away from what we have for you. And it's interesting because this idea of looking at us as fugitives, even though no crime has been committed, still has this residue in contemporary history. I want to reference what I feel really gives a lot of energy, a lot of directness to what Patrick Reed and Edmonia Lewis and Frédéric Bartholdi, excuse me, what they were trying to address in their own subtle way, if I may. And that made me want to reach out and share a speech, at least an excerpt from a speech that was given by Frederick Douglass, July the 5th, 1852. You must read the whole speech. This speech, it really hits home to this whole idea of the question, what to the slave is the 4th of July. Again, the 4th of July is the what? The Declaration of it's a Declaration of Independence Day. It's Independence Day, Declaration of Independence. And Frederick addressed that question. And what I found really interesting was this excerpt amongst the whole speech that he was asked to give, to really hit home with that idea of freedom. And if I may, fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those in represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom, of natural justice, embodied in the Declaration of Independence, extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offerings to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devoted gratitude for blessings resulting from your independence to us? Wow, unquote. Here, Frederick Douglass was invited to give a presentation about this idea of the Declaration of Independence, that if you was reading and did not know that this particular document was being promoted during the same period that slavery, legalized slavery, political system set in place, economic system set in place to enslave and oppress a group of people, the Africans. And yet at the same time, asking those same individuals to celebrate the Declaration of Independence for the European. And so if I can go and kind of summarize, I'll go back and look at what we just went over and what I just presented to you, is that here we have two artists in this country, Reason and Lewis, who responded through their work, their creative work, responded to what they had went through, what they had experienced. Looking at Patrick Reason's engraving, Am I Not a Man, a Brother? And we look at the figure, the way it's handled, it has a very Afrocentric feel or aesthetics. It's responding to the environment and the experience that he was having. And at Mona Lewis, when we look at hers, we see a refined quality academic approach to sculpture making with a Eurocentric aestheticism that is embracing this European aestheticism to create work to be so she can be included or be able to engage in that form of art making in a way that she could also have a voice about who she is and where she should belong. And then we have Frédéric Bartholdi, who looking from France, he looked over toward America. He was commissioned, he was paid to create this piece, this Statue of Liberty. First was known as the Enlightening the World. But it actually, the word Statue of Liberty, they didn't start actually continuing to call it the Statue of Liberty until 1924, if my memory serves me correct. In 1924, it became like, we're gonna continue to call it the Statue of Liberty. And so as a result, he was looking at America and he was looking at the Lincoln's emancipation and what was going on in America as a way to guide and navigate in terms of how he was creating this, what he was creating this work about. Give the people their freedom, give them their liberty, allow them to have the pursuit of happiness. And so here we find that these three particular artists are connected that they are joined together through their work and through the history of this country. And so I really think that there's no other way to look at the Statue of Liberty than to see it as a part of the Black experience in America. And not only a part of the Black experience, but a symbol that spoke to the idea of true freedom. This idea of unchaining your citizens. And then also, even true enough, the original intent of the gift to America, of their independence and for freedom, respect the idea. But we also remember that that Declaration of Independence was not for all people. It was specifically for whites who were coming into this country. And so, okay. And I would like to open up for questions or comments or anything that you may have in mind.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. Gosh, it gave us a lot to think about, that's for sure. And to look at something that we've kind of, an icon that we've seen forever, and then to look at it differently is really fascinating. And I felt like I was sitting back in sitting in a college classroom, and it's so great to be able to feel like you can have access to something like that. Again, one of the nice things about this environment is that we have a chance to speak with someone like you who's 5 hours away, and you can bring them to our patrons here in Lincolnshire. So we can take any questions. You can put them in the chat, and Professor would be happy to answer them. Professor, tell us about the classes that you teach at SIU, just really quickly, so people kind of know what else your background is in.
I teach painting and drawing.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the painting course that I teach, I designed myself, called Mixed Media Exploration, which students are engaging in experimental art. They experiment with different types of other material processes that may not be contemporary. And I treat it as though they were the young Leonardo da Vinci, who was looked on more as an inventor or a mechanic than an artist. And I kind of get the students to understand that you are not just practicing the traditional art form, which is good. I think that we need to know the Italian Renaissance techniques of painting, the proper mixing and so forth. We should maintain and keep that history going, but we should also have the innovative ideas to bring to the table of today to see how we can make art even more appealing to our needs intellectually as well as physically. I also teach a professional development to my grad students, preparing them to go into the professional art world. If they're interested and they plan on being a professional artist, they need to know what do that mean. So they have opportunity to learn how to write a proper resume, a cover letter, how to interviews, how to do a slide presentation properly, how to write contracts, learn some of the your legal rights in terms of your legal rights as an artist. You know, for instance, resale art. A lot of them don't know that some of their work is resold, that they are obligated to get maybe 10% depending on the state. And so all these things that they may not know about the professional art world. How do you have a conversation with the curated museum of American art versus talking to a commercial gallery downtown somewhere? And so trying to be able to be more precise in their development. You plan on being an educator. You want to teach. How do you professionally prepare yourself for an interview and a job? And so, and how do you do what if you want to do a residency? How you go about doing residency? How do you write grants? You know, and so and then let them know that there's no one grant fit all. Grants, each grant has its own rules, and they need to be aware of those rules. And how do you go about knowing those rules ahead of time?
It's really interesting. I'm sure your students are really grateful for getting that information. Let's see, we have a couple questions coming in here now that I want to share with you.
Yes.
So one of the questions is, why is this still a hidden story of the shackles on the feet of the Statue of Liberty? Like, why do people not know about this?
Well, from the conversations I've had over the past 30 years, one of the things that I realized that it hurts to hear the truth. Sometimes it's some people, it's just like somebody walking on the flag, and someone who's real loved the American flag. I'm like, oh my God, how do you know, that's like someone taking my mother's wedding dress, laying on the ground and start stomping on top of it. Oh my God, what are you, crazy? And so you got to realize that people have certain sentimental attachments to this particular icon. And so sometimes it's hard for them to have a conversation. I remember Dick Gregory told me one thing. He said, it hurts to heal. And so that's why now I explain to my students, they say, for those students who may feel somewhat sensitive toward this, I need to let you know it hurts to heal. That in order to appreciate the history, get the correct perception of history, you have to accept that. And I think a lot of people can have a hard time dealing with that. I think another reason is because no one think that anyone is listening. A perfect example, Michelle Obama made a statement one time in front of some of the political wives of her, and when her husband was in office. And she said, my husband becoming president, this made me feel like a real American for the first time. And they were appalled by it. They said, oh my God, you got your nerve, come be well-educated, benefit from the system, da, da, da. And some reason they couldn't see the little trinkets that she was dressed up in was not the problem. I mean, was not the reward that we're looking for, trinkets. That the reward is wanting to be a part of a community and a society and a country that it welcomes you more than just being what you perceive me to be. And so I think that just like, so Michelle probably was thinking a long time, for many years, but she probably found the first time she was saying, I feel like comfortable, I could say it in this setting. Sometimes we could say certain things in setting, and it's taken on as that we're attacking America. We're attacking white society. We're attacking that this is, that we're looking for a way to destroy it. No, we're just saying, let's face the truth. Let's start the healing process. Let's look at what's behind these monuments that they have in our country. We're in a period of time right now where the monuments is the thing to tear down now. I ain't trying to, no pun intended. But the thing is that we're not actually, someone may say, hey, oh, you bringing this up, what you trying to do? You want to tear down the Statue of Liberty? I don't think so. Because the Statue of Liberty points in more than one direction. It actually is a tribute to the Emancipation Proclamation, but it's also a tribute to the independence that they experienced. And you got to read Frederick Douglass's lecture, because in his beginning of his lecture, he spoke highly of them honoring and celebrating this idea of independence and how important it is and so forth. But then he said, but don't forget, you asking me to give a talk about something that you're benefiting and enjoying, and you deny me at the same time. Right. And so, but I think that my daughter, I'll give you another example about people not knowing about this. My youngest daughter was in middle school, and she would correct the the teachers in the middle school sometimes. So if they was talking about the Statue of Liberty, and she was probably mentioning what I have taught her. And they were like, no. She actually got suspended for telling the classroom that Lewis Lattimore created the filament in the light bulb that we use today. She said that Lewis Lattimore worked for Thomas Edison, but it was not Thomas Edison who invented the light bulb. There were several people working for Edison who had created light bulbs, but they couldn't get them to work. It was Lewis Lattimore, who was African-American, who created the filament that made the light bulb work that we use today. And Thomas Edison get credit for it because it was his company, not because he invented the light bulb. And so my daughter, the teacher was upset with her, said she was speaking out of turn, and they suspended her for several days out of school.
Wow. Wow, that's an interesting story.
So
very frustrating.
Trying to tell these stories about the Statue of Liberty and others has become very difficult, not only to the adults, but even to our children.
I should mention that if people that are kind of interested in this kind of topic, we do have a lecture coming up September 14th with a professor from the University of Dayton who's going to be talking about monuments and statues and kind of racial justice and what the link between the removal of some of these statues and kind of the movement towards racial justice. So we have a professor from the University of Dayton who's going to be talking about this in September, and we're really looking forward to that. But anyhow, in the meantime, we do have a couple more questions coming through for you.
Yeah.
So let's see. Someone wrote a comment. She writes, I'm interested to know if that feeling of disassociation to Independence Day is a contemporary feeling in the Black community, and is it relevant in the art of people of color today?
Okay, very, very good question. We as African Americans do not share. Try to share because after time, how can I articulate this in a way that I don't marginalize it? African Americans have been knowing this for the longest. Frederick Douglass' speech, that's in our household. We have a Black national anthem. I always tell my students say, y'all have a national anthem? Yes, we do. We got to remember, we lived in a segregated society. It's only in recent history that we've been together. You know, if we think about the amount of time in terms of what's been going on, and then even though we coming together, there's a lot of things that still keep us apart. So we've been doing this for long, and yes, it does make a difference, but we as African Americans have a way of saying we understand what the Declaration of Independence means, so we support the meaning, but we do not support the actions and behavior of those who claim it when you continue to keep me from having independence or having freedom. So it's like that, remember that double consciousness I was talking about earlier in the lecture? The double consciousness is exactly what I'm talking about. Frederick Douglass wrote in 1903, he published it, but before he wrote it, discussion of this idea of double consciousness. Am I Black or am I white? Michael Jackson, I think about his video song, am I Black or white, the song he did. And so then also, we're looking at the fact that, am I American or am I African? And if I'm African, what do I really know about Africa after being in this country, you know, under these conditions? Even though a lot of, contrary to most people believe, a lot of things that's happening in America, that's in America, is from the African society, that's part of African culture. So what does it mean anything today? Yes, it does have, we understand that this is a problem, and we talk about it myself, but what can we really, what does it solve? What are we able to solve by having today by not engaging in the idea of independence? So we chose to look at the idea of independence and not the historical behavior of those who introduced the 4th of July.
And do you see, I guess the other part of the question was, do you see this being portrayed in art today? In some art it is. It's mostly during the 1960s and early 70s, you've seen a lot of it. It was more prominent then. I think that this idea of post-Black has also, I think, pulled some of the younger intellectual artists away from engaging in this type of discourse. But I think it's going to come back, because I think what's been happening across America, and many countries are responding to it, that many of these artists are going to start responding to this idea of freedom, social justice, not only in the historical context, but also in the contemporary context. And we have another question here. The person writes, did the word brother have the same meaning then as we might understand it today? That is, as a Black man, he's referring to, am I not a man and a brother?
Right. Back then, it was talking about brother in more in a universal sense. Meaning that, you know, because when I talk to a brother, like brother man, you know, African-American men could walk up and nod both of them out our heads to each other. And we had a long conversation just with that one nod that everybody around us didn't even know. Because that nod means, hey, I'm here with you. You here? I'm here too. Hey, you cool? I'm cool. We cool. We got this, right? Okay. You need things? I'm here. Just, you know, that whole signal type of acknowledgement, that's dying as time goes on. So the idea of brother back then was more of a statement by white, because it was used by white abolitionists as well as Black abolitionists. Okay, so it wasn't something that was originated by Black abolitionists. It was the Black abolitionists that embraced it from the white abolitionists who was using it. And so it became a universal, it was more of a universal. even today we tried, I see African Americans and talking to an Asian or a Europe American and say, hey, what's up, brother? They're doing that now, and it's coming to saying that, hey, we're a universal family. So that's what it was, back then, that's what it really lent itself to. It was not talking about brother as we know in the Black community.
Gotcha, okay. Well, I think we've answered the questions that came through. Lots of people were saying what a great presentation it was.
I'm glad they enjoyed it.
Really, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really an honor, and we really learned so much from you, and just thank you very much.
And forgive me for that mislabeling on the slide.
Oh, no. Your slides were great. And yes, I know. So everyone, thank you for joining us. We hope you continue to tune into our library programs. Check out our online calendar to stay in touch with us. And I see there's a little more question coming in here through the Q&A.
Okay.
There's someone says her name is Maurice Davis, and she's a former student of yours. Is there a way to watch this again? Oh yes, we did record this presentation. We will post it on the library's YouTube channel, and we will email everybody who was signed up for this with the link so they can go back and watch it or share it with other people they think might be interested in it.
Well, I appreciate it. My former students have been really great over the years, have been sharing the information with middle school, high schoolers, and other colleges. And I think that they have gained a lot from it. And I'm not just talking about Black students, I'm talking about Asian, Europe Americans, Hispanics, you name it. Arabs have just been impressed with the information and have shared it with others. And thank y'all, thank you your audience too. Thank you for participating in this process.
Yeah, it was our pleasure to host you. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.